So how are we doing, Resolve? We doing all right? Awesome. Any Disney Plus owners in the room? Okay, a lot of us, many. So here's the thing about Disney Plus. It's got me feeling all nostalgic because, see, growing up with a lot of those Disney movies, I didn't watch those on a streaming service. No one knew what that was. We had a very amazing, spectacular piece of technology called a VHS. And the amazing thing about the VHS is that you'd watch the whole movie, right? And it's on one track. And when you get to the end, you could rewind it, but that took like 12 years. And so instead, you would buy another piece of equipment. Anyone have this? There was like a rewinding machine, and it was about the size of VHS, a little bit bigger, looked like a tiny microwave. And you'd pop the VHS in it, you'd close it, and it'd go, and it would like fast rewind it. Anyone have this? Anyone? Okay, a few of my leaders in the room know what I'm talking about. And this is the horrible life we had to live. I mean, this is what we dealt with all the time was VHS technology. And so this was me as a kid. I loved Disney movies, and I would always get some for Christmas and holidays, and they come, as that VHS, and I would watch them, but I was really weird. I would just watch them over and over and over again. So I'd get done watching one, I'd pop in the rewinder, 5 seconds later, watch it again. And that was just kind of how I rolled. And so as I was thinking through some of my favorites, I wanted to go, the classics, the ones that started it first, okay, not the remakes, not the fake stuff, but the first ones that came out. And here's some of my favorites. The first one that's just like, man, this one stood out. This was probably one of my favorites. Can you throw that up there? Any Aladdin fans in the room? I haven't seen the new one. I haven't brought myself to do it yet, but I loved Aladdin so much. I would watch it over and over and over and over again. And here's why a lot of us love Disney movies. Because they're not just stories. There's kind of this moving piece to them, right? When you watch a Disney movie, there's something about you that feels inspired or something that you want to go out and do. And so Aladdin, for me, after watching it over and over again, it's kind of all about that strength is within, that wealth is within, and that you can find all of these things. And that's what Aladdin was really about. I found another one. This one was one of my favorites, Hercules. This one, listen, I'm just going to be real. There are very few that got me dancing alone in my room, but this is the one. This one, I just loved everything about it. But Hercules, if we were to break it down to the moral of the story, you watch it over and over again, and you really start to believe that you can chase your dreams. Right? That with hard work, you can go after what's ahead of you, and you can gain that dream that you had. He wanted to be a hero, and so he worked hard. He found the right people to come alongside of him and achieved it. And then this last one, I had one more, but I couldn't go on without this one. Any Lion King fans in the room? Man, the Lion King for me, again, just over and over and over again. And Lion King, really, if you break it down, it's about how good will triumph over evil in the end. And I'm thinking about all three of these and what you can learn from them, the moral behind it. And it's what makes Disney stories so compelling. The other moral that's in all of them is that the good guys always get the girl. Amen? And so as you watch these over and over again, you start to realize that they're using stories to communicate something powerful. They're using a video, a story, something that can stick in your head because stories, they stay with us. Stories you remember, stories you don't forget. A lot of you still can quote lines like I can of those movies because stories, they stay with us. And there's something powerful because it's one thing if we were to just, read a book and it just said, hey, your dreams are possible, hard work pays off, good prevails over evil. But it's another thing to put it into a story that will stick with us, that will stay in our minds, that we can visualize, and actually kind of moves to our heart. This is how people work, and Jesus knew this. And so Jesus, as he's walking the earth, and he's trying to communicate God to man. Think of the things that he's trying to communicate. Heaven, salvation, new life, forgiveness. There's all these big topics that he's sitting back going, how do I describe who God is, what his heart's like, what is my heart toward people, to the people listening to me? And so he did what Disney's done, what Netflix does, what so many do. And he said, let me frame it in story. Let me describe and explain a story that at the core of this story, there's a point. And that's really what a parable is. You've probably heard this term if you've grown up in church. If you haven't heard this, but you might at some point, just know a parable is a story that has a spiritual point or a meaning or a lesson inside of it. And so Jesus talks in a lot of these parables because he wants to communicate powerful things to people. And so what we're going to do over the next several weeks is we're going to take the parables of Jesus and we're going to talk through them. Because if Jesus felt like these were the greatest, most difficult to understand pieces of God, and yet he wanted to put them down to something we could all grab hold of, then that's my hope for the next few weeks, is that you would actually walk away going, man, I'm showing up every Wednesday night with my friend, and yeah, we smash eggs, and it's a ton of fun, but also I now understand this huge thing of God through a story and through a parable. And so the one we're going to look at today, it's in Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15. And he starts off by writing about the audience. Now, Luke includes who the audience was to this parable, and this is actually incredibly important. Because if you're in English classes, you know this. Who you're writing to actually changes the meaning of the story. And so the audience tells us right away in verse 1, it says, now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathered around to hear Jesus. Now, that may be a line that you just kind of brush over. Honestly, I have brushed over this line for years, but I want to break this apart for a second, because if you see the people there in front of him, it says they're tax collectors. Now, tax collectors at the time were pretty hated people. They were the outcasts of society. They essentially were hired to work for the government to steal for their own people, and then they would take some off the top to line their pockets, and so essentially they were swindlers. And so this, in the group of people that were seen as esteemed in society, this wasn't a group of people that were praised. They were pretty ostracized and hated. And then he just says, and sinners. And really what he's saying here is that there was a group of people who were following Jesus who were very unlike the religious people. They claimed a lifestyle. They claimed something about themselves that they would classify non-religious. And yet, don't miss this, they were all gathered around Jesus. So one thing we can learn in this seemingly simple introduction is that what John's trying to point out is that Jesus, this guy who claims to be God himself, so the most religious you could be, is surrounded by people who are messy. And they seem to like him. And so right away we get this picture of who Jesus was. But there's another group of people right next to the sinners and the tax collectors, and it says in the next verse. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, so these are the religious people, these are the religious elite, they muttered, this man welcomes sinners and he eats with them. And this is a powerful point because they're watching this scene happen, and they're looking at the group of people that Jesus is not just hanging out with, not just teaching, but he's eating meals with them. He's taking time to get to know them. He's asking them questions. He's in life with them. Like, who is this guy that would claim to be God, and yet he's hanging out with those people? This is what the religious group thought. Now, here's the thing. We like to think, oh, that is just an old thing that happened in the Bible, and that's these religious people, and they look down on others. But you know this still happens today. That so many of us, especially if you feel like you are a church person, if you feel like you've done a lot of good things in your life, here's what you might realize tends to happen, is that you will, not meaning to, maybe not intentionally, you will look at someone else who hasn't done as many good things, or who maybe is choosing to do the opposite of good things, and you look at them and you can begin to think, well, they don't belong in my small group. Oh, they don't belong in this place. They don't belong in this event that I'm going to. Why are they here? And maybe some of us, if we were to be honest, we can actually kind of relate to what the Pharisees were feeling in this moment. Now, there are others of you, maybe you kind of relate to the other group of people in the story, and you relate to this group who is labeled a sinner. And you go, man, that's really cool that people like to hang around Jesus and felt welcomed and felt loved. But honestly, if I were to be honest about my life and what I'm dealing with, when I step into church, I don't feel welcomed and loved. When I talk to religious people, I don't feel that kind of closeness that they had with Jesus. And I kind of relate to this group who's been outcast or pushed aside or feels like they're they're ruined because of something they've done. And so maybe you're in the room and you feel like you relate more to the sinner. Here's the issue. Both groups share the same problem. And this problem is that we feel that in order to be in with God, people have to behave a certain way. Regardless of what side you're on, maybe again, you feel like you are pushed out or pushed aside and there's distance between you and God because you feel like you have to do something, you have to behave a certain way in order to be in with God. And on the flip side, if you're one of the church people, the good people who would look down on others, essentially what you're saying is they need to fix something about themselves to be in with God. See, at the end of the day, we believe the same lie. And so Jesus in this moment, he has both groups. And he's going to try and figure out a way to break this lie. And he says, I got it. I'm going to use a story. And so he begins this amazing story. It's one that you might have heard before, but we're going to start in Luke 15, verse 11 and 12. And this is what he does. He doesn't start to break down this crazy theological concept. He simply says, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to the father, Father, give me my share of the estate. So he divided his property between them. So basically, here's what's happening. When the dad died, he was going to give his inheritance, everything that he had, his land, his money, all of his cattle and whatever else was on his farm. And he was going to give that to his 2 sons, a younger one and an older one. And so this younger son decides, you know what? I've had it with you. I've had it with this life. I don't want to live in your house anymore. And so let's make this arrangement. You act like you're dead. I'm going to leave your household. I'm going to leave connection with you. And will you go ahead and give me the inheritance as if you were dead? This is the younger son's great idea. To spit in the father's face and say, thank you for everything you've done, but no thank you. I'm going to do this on my own. I'm going to figure it out. You are dead to me. Give me my stuff. I'm out. And then we see what happens next as Jesus progresses in the story. It says, not long after that, so in a short time period, the younger son got together all that he had, and he set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. So the son was like those people that win the lottery and in like a couple of years they just buy a bunch of 4-wheelers and then they're broke again. Like this was the mentality of the younger son. He had all of his stuff, he was loaded up, he was ready to go, and so quickly. He didn't have the right structure, he didn't think his decisions through, he wasn't mature enough or wise enough to stand on his own, and so he began to make mistakes very, very quickly that led him to nothing. And that's what we see in the next verse. It says, after he spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and he hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. So in just a short period of time, we see this guy go from rich to broke, from having it all to being on his own to knowing what he's doing, to wanting to eat what pigs are eating. That's the transformation that this son makes through his decisions and his mistakes. So he gets to this place where he is just beaten down, lost everything, doesn't know where to go. And then we see him have this revelation moment. It says when he came to his senses, he realized this was not how he had planned it to be and that he had had so much more back at home, more than he could have ever imagined. He came to his senses and he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. And so he got up and he goes to his father. So he decides, I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back to my dad, and I because of what a horrible thing I did, because I pretty much said I wish you were dead and took all of your stuff and then lost it. There's no way he'll forgive me. There's no way we're going to be okay again. But maybe if I just apologize and admit my fault and own up to it, maybe I can be like one of his workers. Our relationship will change. There will be distance between us, but at least maybe there will be some way that we can still have some kind of connection, even if he just hires me to work. Now, if we pause the story, imagine what the audience is thinking. They're listening, expecting, probably like maybe you are, especially if you haven't heard this before, what would happen next. I mean, I don't know about you, but what would happen with your parents next? You might expect a long lecture. You might expect a really difficult few months as you process this. You might expect that the dad says, hey, you're going to pay me back with interest, and here's the plan I'm going to put you on. You might expect that he maybe does even give him a job and allows him to work on this farm. But that's not what happens. Because in verse 20 it says this. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him, and he was filled with compassion for him. And he ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. So what's happening is the son is on his way back. And before he's close, before he can even say a word, the father drops everything, runs out to meet him, hugs him, kisses him, to say, hey, it's all okay. And the son's trying to process this, and so he says next, the son said to him, Father, listen, I've sinned against heaven and against you. He's rehearsing what he had wanted to say to his father. He said, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, didn't even let him finish what he had prepared earlier. Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And so they began to celebrate. The dad in this moment doesn't tell him what he did wrong. He doesn't say, yeah, it's going to be a while before we're okay again. He doesn't say, here's the steps you need to start taking before you can be my son, and then we'll figure this out. No, he looks at him and he says, not only are we okay, and do you not have to finish your sentence, but you're not going to just be another worker in my house. In fact, I'm going to make you the most celebrated. I'm going to bring more things to give you. I'm going to celebrate the decision that you've made to come back to me. Why? Because you are my son. And by doing all of this, the dad is saying, hey, listen, all is forgiven. It's over. Whatever happened, it's behind us. There's no debt to repay. It is all finished. It is all done. I know you make mistakes. I see your mistakes, but I don't see them anymore. I just see you. But now remember, two groups listening. And for the sinners and the tax collectors listening to the story that Jesus is telling, they're going, I've never heard anything like this. I mean, hold on. You're saying that by coming to God, there is total forgiveness? That there's no separation or distance between the Son and the Father, that he would just welcome him back? But then there's also a religious group listening. And they're frustrated by this story, going, no. There should be distance between the Father and the Son, right? I mean, surely there should be some repayment that they have to do. I mean, what if he makes the same mistake again? What if it doesn't fit into our paradigm? So at the end of the day, and don't miss this, Jesus then says, because there's religious people in the room, he knows what they're thinking. He goes on and he says, now there's an older brother. So he introduces a new character in the story. There's an older brother, and he became angry, and he refused to go in. And so his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all of these years I have been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. Kind of a weird reward system in this culture, but that's what they had. You never got me those nice Nikes. You never got me the Xbox 360. But then this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home. He's lost everything. You kill the fattened calf for him. You celebrate him. You give it all. You act as if he's done something worth celebrating. My son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So using this amazing art of story, Jesus talks directly to the religious people who in this moment are saying, that's not fair. That's not right. Someone else probably did all these good things, and yet this guy gets celebrated. And so Jesus introduced a character that says the exact same thing. And then he's able to play the voice of Jesus, the voice of God to this brother, to the religious people, and say, listen, we have to celebrate because our son has come home. Don't miss this. Both groups thought the same thing. Both groups thought that the son should pay for what he did. Both of them thought the son should pay. The sinners in the room are going, that doesn't make sense. Why would there not be resistance? His plan sounded right. That's how I feel. And the religious people are saying, yeah, it doesn't make sense that he should have to work his way back into the Father's graces. And yet, students, this is what makes the gospel, the story of Jesus, so compelling, so countercultural, is that lie is wrong. That when it comes to Jesus, you don't have to be fixed to be found. This is the only religion where you don't work your way up to God. He's done something about it, and he's come down to us. And these sinners are really believing this lie that we have to fix our behavior, that we have to do something different, and then we can be in with God. The religious people believing the same thing, that they have to get their stuff together, then they can be here, then they can belong, then we can eat with them. And yet Jesus shows up on the scene and says, no, understand this story. The son did nothing to be fixed. He did nothing right. He made wrong choices. He treated me as I was dead. He left. He gave up. But I didn't give up on him. And for the people in the room who you feel, I'm a good person, I kind of have it together, Jesus is saying, hey, don't give up on someone else. For those in the room who you're kind of relating to that sinner group and you think, man, I've just done too much. I'm too far gone. God can't love me now. If I were to come back, there'd have to be some kind of agreement because there's no way based on what I've done that things would just be okay immediately. And you need to hear that God is telling you, I'm never giving up on you. You don't have to fix something before you take that step. That as you're a long way off, before you can say a word, God is rushing in to hold you, to forgive you, to celebrate you. This truth was so different that no matter what you've done, you are worth finding to Jesus. And so the question is, who are you in the story? Maybe some of you are in this room and you're going, listen, I'm a good kid. And I have some people in my life that I haven't invited. If I'll be honest, I haven't even treated well. I do kind of feel like if they showed up in my small group, that would be weird because they just don't belong. And tonight, this story that Jesus is communicating to his audience, he's communicating to you. He wants you to know that that person that's next to you that doesn't have it together, that they don't actually have to get it together before they're invited into the story of Jesus. That he is for them, that he loves them, that they do belong. It's not because of what they've done. They're able to walk in these doors, sit in your small group, sit at the feet of Jesus. He is for them. He is behind them. And those are the ones he celebrates because those are the ones he wants. Because there is a party that is happening every time someone goes from, I've lost it all, I'm hopeless, I'm desperate, I don't want this life, I want the Father again, I want to be loved, I want to be accepted, I know it's found in Jesus. When that happens, things are celebrated. It's the heart of God. And too often, Christians are the ones sitting on the sidelines going, not fair. Not fair. I show up every week. I've never sent a text like that. I've never been to ISS for those things. And I just feel like Jesus would stop and say, no. There's an older brother. And he needed to see that we don't give up on people. because they can't seem to get it together. But maybe you're in the room and you're that second group. And tonight you showed up feeling like, I don't know about walking into church because I remember what happened last year, last month, an hour before I got here. And because I'm thinking about that, I don't feel worthy, I don't feel clean. And maybe I don't even want to start a relationship again with Jesus because I know I'm going to have to have one of those really long, difficult prayers with him. And I'm going to have to talk to my small group leader and probably do a few things, maybe read 3 books, and then he'll start to love me and accept me, and maybe I can work my way back into this relationship. And I need you to know that if you were here tonight and that's your thought process and that was what you were feeling walking in, that it is not coincidence that you were here. That God has orchestrated this moment to speak clearly to you, that he is using a story to speak to your heart, to say that's not at all how he views you, that he loves you. That it's okay if you're a long way off, if you haven't figured this out yet. That he wants to meet you where you're at. And you are not too far gone for him. And so I just want to pray for us in just a moment. And whichever one of those camps you feel like you're sitting in, I think God wants to say something to you. Because if you feel like that good person and it's hard for you to accept people who are on the outs, I want to challenge you. Would you pray for those people? Would you just start there? It's a tiny baby step, but would you just start to say, you know what, I'm going to pray for the ones who I don't understand, who are making bad decisions, and instead of pushing them aside, I'm going to speak life into them. And on the other end, if you feel like you can't come to Jesus because of what you've done, know that you can take a step today. I don't know what that step looks like for you. Maybe you need to take a step into a relationship with him. That you've kind of been resistant to that, and people talk about following Jesus, and you just haven't wanted to become a Christian yet because you have so much baggage. And I want you to know that you have the freedom to take that step toward Christ because you don't have to clean yourself up before you're accepted. And tonight, you can begin a relationship with him. Maybe for you, that step is to get back into prayer, get back into reading scripture. Maybe that step is to keep showing up at church and into your small group, even though you've been feeling guilty, that tonight you can shake that off and realize that that is not God's heart. So I'm going to pray for us, but I want to ask all of us, would you take a step? Let's pray. God, I thank you for speaking right now to so many of us. I thank you for the voices in the back of our head that's calling out so specifically what we need to do right now. I pray for those in the room who have realized that they need to love people who don't look like them. That they need to love people who aren't making the greatest decisions. God, would you help us to take a step and begin to pray for those people? Begin maybe even to seek out those people, to eat with those people, to spend time with those people, because that was what you did. God, I pray for the student right now who's struggling to take a step toward you. Would you give them the boldness in this moment to take that step? For the student who's on the fence about having a relationship with you, would you give them the courage to do that now? Because we are going to celebrate with them the same way you celebrated in your story, the same way you celebrate in heaven. And I pray you would give them the courage to talk to their small group leader about it in their small group, because they're going to be celebrated and cheered, because no matter where they've been or what they've done, they are taking a step toward you. So God, in this moment right now, we just talk with you. Would you move?